The stories. Why locals avoided that church basement after the flood. The church sat on a low rise beyond the river curve, and everyone still called it a safe hill. Neighbors said the floodwater reached the stained steps anyway, and the basement stayed damp long after the river fell. Clara Vass, 34, worked as a field insurance adjuster who took pictures, typed notes, and kept calm voices moving. She drove into the town after the levee break, aiming to document damage and close claims before tempers soured. Her goal for that day was simple: confirm a cluster of small claims tied to the hilltop church. The first change to her plan arrived when the custodian waved from the door, then refused the handshake. He gave his name as Ortis Malo, 57, a retired welder who mowed the lawn and watched the boiler. He said the sanctuary was fine, then pointed at the basement with a look people wear when a dog growls under a porch. Clara asked for access, and he said the pastor wanted meetings upstairs only. She took exterior photos, careful with angles, noting water lines marked by silt and by seeds caught on mortar. A neighbor named Nella Groft, 61, carried a crate of hymnals toward a sedan and paused to watch her. Nella said the basement had stayed locked since the flood week and that no one wanted to carry anything down there. Clara liked facts more than rumors, so she asked for invoices, damage logs, and utility records. Ortis handed over a folder with photocopied bills, each page smelling like bleach even through the plastic sleeve. The electric bill showed a high spike the week after the river fell, which struck her as odd for an empty space. When she asked for the basement key, Ortis rubbed his jaw and said the lock stuck, then said the pastor handled everything personally. She kept her voice soft, mentioned schedule pressure, then offered to meet the pastor after dinner and finish this site today. He agreed, but he kept glancing at the stairwell door like it might open on its own. Clara went to the county office and checked archived calls for emergency service, using an index the clerk let her see without fuss. The church address appeared twice during the flood days, once for a fuel smell, once for a welfare check that cleared in minutes. A dispatcher note said volunteers had stacked food in the basement for short-term storage. She returned before sunset, met the pastor near the front pews, and introduced herself with her license card. Pastor Enoch Varela, 46, wore a work shirt with rolled sleeves, and his palms looked scraped at the knuckles. He repeated that the sanctuary took no damage, then said the basement had a minor issue they were addressing privately. Clara explained her process, said transparency helped claims move faster, and asked for a basic walkthrough with photos. He agreed to a limited tour, then warned her that the air down there felt close and would not be pleasant. She took out a disposable respirator she kept for mold sites, and he nodded with relief, like that solved part of it. The key turned after a stubborn rattle, and the door opened with a smell like wet paper mixed with diesel. Steps went down into dimness that felt cooler than upstairs, and the walls showed a faint brown tide mark. Her light found a row of folding tables stacked with canned goods and boxes, all tied off with twine. Several tabletops were warped, and the legs stood at different heights because someone had shimmed them with hymnals wrapped in plastic. A generator sat to one side with a coiled cord, and the floor around it showed a clean square like a rug had been there. She photographed outlets, tagged the generator model, and asked why they needed so much power for a basement pantry. The pastor said the generator ran sump pumps for 2 nights, then stopped working from grit in the line. Ortis stood near the bottom step and rubbed the rail, his knuckles pale, like he hated the room and also belonged to it. Clara noticed a water line over the breaker box, which meant the panel had taken a hit and still looked strangely spotless. A woman appeared in the doorway, waved, and introduced herself as Paloma Cray, 32, a volunteer nurse with the food team. Paloma asked if Clara needed masking tape for labels, then added that people had slept here during the flood watch. The pastor cut in with a quick no, and Paloma closed her mouth and drifted back into shadow. Clara felt the hush that follows a correction and decided to run her questions in a sequence that built without heat. She asked about occupancy during the flood, and Pastor Varela said only supplies had been staged downstairs. She asked to see any damage to pew cushions or classrooms, and he steered her back toward the stairs with a brisk thank you. In the parking lot, a teenager skated past and kicked the curb, then said people said the basement hummed after midnight. He pointed at the brickwork view vents near the ground and said sound came out like a freezer that could talk. He grinned, then looked sorry for talking, and pushed off toward the next slot without another word. Clara sat in her car and recorded a memo into her phone, keeping the tone neutral and the timestamp obvious. She reviewed photos, zoomed on the clean square by the generator, and marked a note about missing equipment. That square looked like freezer footprint, and on a raised plan like this basement, a freezer could stay mostly dry. Her next stop was a building supply yard, where she asked the clerk for recent sales of heavy appliances paid in cash. The clerk shrugged, then said a man from the church bought a chest freezer late in the flood week and paid without a receipt. That detail qualified as a witness statement, and she typed it as such, careful not to lean on it more than it deserved. Evening pushed in, and she returned for one more look while people set up for a community meal upstairs. She asked Paloma for 5 minutes in the basement to recheck the panel labels, promising to stay out of the way. Paloma agreed, then quietly handed over a small key that looked too new for an old door, her eyes level and steady. Downstairs, the lights flickered as if a loose connection lived somewhere behind the fresh panel cover. Near the far wall, she found 2 pallets draped with tarps that had been taped several times, and the tape pulled white in places. A faint, sweet odor rode the damp smell, like fruit left in a trunk after a warm day at the lake. She lifted a corner and found case water stacked over a long trough cut into the slab, its edges chipped and sharp. A length of garden hose ran from the trough to a sill drain where floodwater had once receded, and the hose still glistened. She followed the hose with her light, stepped around the tarps, and saw the end shoved behind a dented freezer. The cord was gone, but a film of oil on the floor traced a path toward the clean square near the generator. She crouched, counted to 5 to settle her breath, then stood and walked back toward the stairs to reset her approach. On the way up, she passed Ortis as he came down, his arms full of clean towels for reasons that felt unclear. Clara asked if they had documented any salvage from the basement that could justify the electric spike. He nodded too quickly, said there had been a spill from a donated machine, and that they had cleaned it thoroughly after. She thanked him, then stepped outside and listened to a rain gutter tick as the day cooled into night. Her hotel room was quiet, and she laid the photos on the table beside the binder she kept for flood jobs. She cross-checked the electric spike days against the generator ownership dates, using calls the county clerk let her copy. A pattern formed, modest and plain, which said power ran in the basement several nights after the river pulled back. She called a friend who worked restoration and asked about standard practice for wet freezers in basements. He said most techs would drag them outside, prop the lid, and tape a sign to keep people away until haul out. He said running a generator indoors for a freezer was dangerous, and added that diesel odor with sweet tang usually meant refrigerant leaked. Clara returned at first light and found Paloma sorting donated jackets on the front steps. Paloma watched the street, then said she had worked disaster shelters before and knew that water brings out the best and worst. She said she had asked to close the basement, and that she would be happier if an outsider made decisions for them. With Paloma present, Clara requested a formal walkthrough with full photo documentation, and the pastor agreed after a long pause. He suggested they invite a town officer to keep things calm, and she agreed without hesitation since an extra witness helps. Officer Renwall, 39, arrived and signed the site log that Clara carried in her bag for exactly this moment. They opened the basement door together, and the smell rose again, edged with sourness that set teeth on edge. Wren kept a straightforward tone, said they would check for safety risks and nothing more, and the pastor nodded with his jaw set. They moved toward the far pallets, and Paloma touched Clara's elbow, then pointed with 2 fingers at the sill drain. Clara photographed the hose, the trough, and the freezer compression dents that matched a recent move across gritty floor. Wren looked at the panel and said the cover was new, then asked if an electrician had cleared it, keeping his voice even. Ortis said he would get the paperwork tomorrow, and stared at the drain like he feared what might back up through it. The twist waited in a storage closet behind a rolling chalkboard where someone had stacked plastic tubs in a neat column. Wren asked permission, lifted the lid on the top tub, and found medical waste bags tied with careful knots. The labels showed a clinic in a nearby county, and date codes matched the flood week plus 3 days after. Paloma exhaled, then said the town clinic had shut power during the worst night and that someone offered temporary cold storage here. The pastor stared at the bags and rubbed his temple, then said yes, they had tried to help and keep things under control. Ordis said the freezer had failed, they had panicked, and they had moved what they could to ice chests upstairs. Clara kept her voice in the middle as she asked whether any records accompanied the delivery of those bags. The pastor produced a photocopy from his wallet that showed a shaky agreement to secure and return the materials promptly. Wren read it twice, nodded, and said they needed to report this and arrange a proper collection, and the pastor said he understood. The pieces now fit the noise locals heard at night, the generator, and the spike in the bill after the rain. Refrigeration had kept those bags stable for a short window, then failed when the sump pumps stole too much current. The sweet tang in the air had been refrigerant, and the last trace of spoiled ice from makeshift coolers. They documented the closet, sealed the tubs again, and carried them upstairs where the air felt simple and bright. Wren radioed the county, asked for a hazmat team and the clinic contact, and kept his words plain so no one panicked. Paloma called volunteers to move the meal upstairs, and they did it quietly, like they were shifting a sleeping child. Within an hour, a small truck arrived with 2 techs who spoke carefully and signed every line Clara handed over. They packed the tubs into rigid containers and handed the pastor a receipt that settled chain of custody without drama. The tech said this sort of mix-up happens in storms when freezers are scarce, and that it becomes a cautionary tale for years. After the truck left, Clara took final photos of the basement and noted the cracked trough that had worried her from the start. She recommended a full inspection for the panel and air testing before volunteers returned to work downstairs. The pastor agreed, his voice steady now, and Ordis finally sat on the steps and let his shoulders drop like a load had slid off. The town never made a scandal of it, since nothing criminal had been intended, and the fix was clean and quick. That said, people still avoided the basement for a while, since memory can stick to concrete and walls like damp. They spoke of the humming nights as a warning, and they stored donations upstairs where anyone could see them in daylight. Clara filed the report that afternoon and drove out past fields that glittered with wet leaves pushed against fences. She felt no thrill, only quiet relief that the pieces had held together and that nothing worse had formed in secret. Her notes added a simple line that generosity without planning can rot faster than anyone expects in warm water. Later, she learned the church held a small meeting and told their members the whole sequence with plain language. They apologized to the clinic and offered money for the generator fuel that had been wasted in the failed plan. People appreciated honesty, but the basement kept its reputation because reputations have long legs when the air has smelled wrong. By autumn, the concrete was scrubbed, fans had run for weeks, and the panel wore a new sticker from an electrician. Still, a few congregants preferred folding tables upstairs, and no one minded because sunlight makes simple promises. When it rained again, the pastor stacked extra caution tape by the stairwell and kept the door locked without debate. Neighbors now say they avoided that basement not because of ghosts or whispers, but because they knew the facts. They remembered that freezers hum for reasons, and that a locked room with a sweet tang is a message rather than a mystery. The town chose to listen, and the story settled where most real stories live, halfway between relief and regret. Clara closed the file and moved on to other roofs and other high-water marks, keeping her methods the same. She asked ordinary questions in steady sequence and waded through pauses that often carried more truth than quick words. The church needed time, the town needed air, and the basement needed light, and they all eventually got what they required. Years later, the flood was referenced as a hard season, not a nightmare, and the hill stayed a safe hill again. People mentioned the humming when they taught young volunteers how to store donations and why clear logs matter most. The pastor still kept the key, but he also kept the receipt that proved the chain unbroken, which made him sleep better. Clara would sometimes pass through on other assignments and find Paloma sorting jackets on the steps with calm hands. They would wave as if nothing remarkable had happened, which felt correct because the point was that nothing worse had arrived. The basement door stayed closed unless the work demanded it, and that quiet was the final lesson worth holding. The stories. Paramedic who kept the final snapshot from triage. The last photo on Kira Voss's work phone was never supposed to survive the software pilot. It stayed anyway after the server hiccup. Kira was 34, a city paramedic who liked quiet late calls and neat paperwork. She started that Tuesday on basic supply checks and light banter. Her goal sounded simple in her head. Finish a 10-hour shift without a single upgrade, then get home before midnight for leftover curry. The call that changed the night came from a roadside motel behind a car wash. Dispatch logged an unresponsive male, unknown age, possible overdose. She and her partner, Mateo Lark, rolled in with lights low and voices steady. Room 12 smelled like cleaner and stale heat from the wall unit. A thin man lay sideways between the bed and a chair, breathing shallow and quick. No wallet in sight. A cracked phone blinking a silent screen. Kira saw a visitor sticker stuck to his hoodie pocket. The date line was smudged, but the background color looked like a clinic pass. They bagged him for a minute to settle his breathing. A half-full paper cup sat by the sink, ice melted into a flat circle of water. Vital signs were jumpy, but not crashing. He opened his eyes once and said a short word that sounded like Riley. Then he slipped under again. They moved fast to the medical center near the river. The radio reported a separate pileup north, which meant triage would be crowded and loud. The hospital had been piloting an electronic intake tool all month. It asked for a quick face photo to match a barcode before the wristband print. The intake line was 3 deep when they arrived. A nurse pushed the cart forward, the printer chattered, everyone talked clipped and fast on instinct. Kira snapped the photo at the kiosk because the app flashed a warning. Upload pending, network unstable. She kept his hoodie on because he shook. The man landed in a monitored bay by the doors. A resident named Bryn Ketter called for labs and a gentle drip. The resident squinted at the chart. Kira wrote her run sheet near the sink. She noted the visitor sticker and the motel room number, and she logged the time from the wall clock. Security cut a small plastic bag from the man's waist string. The bag held a folded laundromat card, a bent key, $3, and a receipt. A second surge of ambulances flooded triage with crash patients. Yellow tags and green tags pressed into the hallway. Voices layered into a dense cloud. In the noise, someone swapped beds to clear space. The man with the hoodie slid one bay over, and a crash patient took his place under a portable lamp. Kira and Mateo finished their handoff after an hour. The man seemed stable. They cleaned the stretcher rails, signed the tablet, and walked toward the exit. The code alarm sounded from the bay they had left. Kira swiveled in the doorway and saw movement through bodies. Someone called for epinephrine with a clipped tone. She stood still without getting in the way. The team pushed and counted and charted. The monitor flattened once, then kicked back, then flatlined again while staff switched roles. Kira did not like leaving after a loss. She did what protocol allows. She tapped Mateo's arm. Then they cleared the doorway and stepped into the humid night. Back at the station, reports stacked up behind them. An hour later, an internal message flagged her run. The patient from the motel did not make it. The summary blamed an unknown allergy aggravated by a blood pressure medication. It suggested the crew had no information at scene and that intake documentation was incomplete. Kira read that line twice. She remembered scratching on his left palm, faint letters smudged by sweat and cleaner. She also remembered the sticker on the hoodie pocket. She opened her notes app and zoomed on a quick photo of the motel nightstand. A corner of the visitor sticker showed a logo like a lighthouse beacon. Her phone buzzed again with a request from quality assurance. Please confirm the scene contained no allergy indications. Please confirm no wallet or tags were found. Kira typed careful answers. She wrote that the scene had no formal bracelet, but there was writing on skin and a clinic sticker with a date line. She could hear Mateo in the next room telling a joke about stale granola bars. She closed her eyes, pictured the kiosk light, and remembered the app freeze. She opened the work app and saw the pending icon. The photo from triage had sat in the queue since that busy hour. It should have deleted itself. She saved a copy to the secure folder because the pilots sometimes ate evidence. Officers who handle accident scenes had warned crews to keep their own digital trail. In the photo, the man stared past the kiosk, eyes unfocused, mouth clenched. The shot was crisp enough to read small print on the edge of his hoodie. She leaned toward the phone and read the visitor sticker again. The shape matched a clinic 2 miles north. The color matched last week's series on their site. She noticed something else that bothered her. The wristband in the photo was already on his right wrist, and the printed name was not Riley or unknown. The name read Colin Hart with a birth year, that was wrong by 2 decades. The band also carried a room assignment for a different wing upstairs. Kira checked the run sheet and confirmed the time on the photo. It was taken before he left intake, with a clock in the frame above the desk. She balanced possibilities in her head. Either the band printer reused a label by accident, or Triage grabbed a band intended for someone from the crash. She called the station supervisor and spoke in a flat voice. She also saved the app log and the photo metadata. She wanted a clean chain if asked. The supervisor told her to hold steady. He said quality would reach out by morning and that she should write her memory within the next hour. Kira wrote about the motel room, the visitor sticker, the palm writing, and the switch between bays during the crash surge. She avoided guesses and listed times. By sunrise, the hospital asked to speak with her. A comm coordinator named Lauren Pike scheduled a meeting in a small office near the loading dock. Loren listened without interruption while Kira laid out the sequence. He wrote down the kiosk freeze, the wrong name on the band, and the sticker details. "Do you have the photo?" he asked plainly. Kira nodded once and slid her phone forward. Loren studied the image like a puzzle that did not want solving. He asked for permission to copy the file into their incident folder. Kira agreed and asked for a printed receipt of transfer. Lauren printed one with a timestamp. Later that day, security pulled camera clips around intake and the hallway. Audio is thin in those clips, but timestamps line up with dispatch logs from that hour. A volunteer recalled bumping the band cart while pushing crash supplies. The cart carried 2 stacks from different printers. A stack fell and another stack landed on top. A nurse remembered seeing a resident hand off a half-printed band to clear paper jams. Everyone meant well, and the hallway demanded corners get rounded to save seconds. The wrong band landed on the wrong wrist during the shuffle. The allergy field below the name read none, and the medication plan followed that value at speed. The palm writing found in the photo said lisinopril with a shaky loop on the L. That writing matched a pharmacy warning card found later in the discarded bag. The path to his name was still unsolved. The wrong band had masked his identity, and the motel room registry carried a fake first name paid in cash. Kira and Mateo stopped by the motel between calls and spoke to the clerk. The clerk remembered the man because he had asked for late checkout and offered a 10. The clerk described a quiet talker with a careful way of folding receipts. He said the man asked if the clinic across the highway took walk-ins on Sundays. Kira asked if he had left anything behind. The clerk pulled a small envelope from under the counter and handed it over. Inside was a second laundromat card. The card carried the same punched pattern as the one from his bag. A faded stamp showed a cartoon lighthouse that matched the clinic logo from the sticker. Kira wrote the clinic name into her notes and searched internal contacts for a social worker who knew someone there. Network rules can sometimes solve what computers cannot. By evening, a social worker faxed a staff list with a first name that matched the word Riley from the ambulance. A receptionist there recalled a cousin who visited often. The cousin lived near the rail tracks and had shared rides with a man named Rail Hinton. That name pulled a match from the clinic immunization folder with a phone number. The number reached a sister on the third ring. She had been calling hospitals all day without luck. She cried once, then steadied, and asked for straight answers. Kira gave the sister the number for Loren and the case coordinator. She explained that the hospital would confirm identity through records, and that she would share what she could. The sister described Rael as a careful man who wrote allergy reminders on his hand while saving for new glasses. She said he kept every receipt because he lost a wallet once. She also said he used visitor stickers as bookmarks. He picked them from clinic bowls like candy, because ink on paper made him feel less small. The hospital identified him formally by evening, using clinic records and a dental chart from an old file. The visitor sticker linked the timeline to a specific morning. The report shifted. Instead of blaming a vague, unknown allergy, the document focused on a band cart process and a printer override protocol during surge conditions. Quality assurance asked to keep Kira's photo, which showed the wrong band before bedside orders fired. Her pending upload had turned into an anchor for the timeline. Loren thanked her in a quiet hallway near the vending machines. He said the photo mattered because it caught a small truth at the exact right second. He also said the hospital planned a training session with a new rule. Wristbands would be applied only after a complete scan and a spoken name confirmation. Kira asked about the visitor sticker and the laundromat card. Lauren said the family had seen those items and that they were grateful for the detail and care. There was a final meeting about the phrase kept photo because the tool policy warned against storing faces. Lauren documented the server failure and the pending icon. He wrote that the photo had been preserved to support timely reporting during a pilot outage. He signed the form with a date and left a copy in her file. Mateo teased her gently about her habit of triple-saving things. He said she was a walking archive with a neat ponytail and an allergic reaction to loose ends. She laughed, then stood quiet for a breath. She thought about the palm writing and how small a warning can look when a hallway feels crowded. Weeks later, a new kiosk arrived with better network checks. The printer trays carried bold labels, and volunteers learned to stop and verify whenever carts bumped. Kira kept a printed run sheet from that night in her desk. The sheet had her small notes about the lighthouse sticker and the ice in the cup. An instructor asked her to teach one class for new hires. She told them about the photo and the band, and the way tiny signals can vanish under noise. A student asked how she remembered so much. She said she wrote on index cards, and she made little recordings after calls while the radio was still warm. The sister sent a letter with a simple line. "Thank you for noticing the sticker." It made the phone call shorter, and it made the goodbye kinder. Kira folded the letter into the run sheet and closed the drawer. She washed her coffee cup, then walked outside to breathe the late shift air. The city sounded like a distant fan that needed oil. She wondered how many small warnings slide past each night because nobody has a free hand to catch them. She knew the photo would fade into policy and training slides. She also knew that a single clear frame can hold a hallway steady when clocks feel slippery. On quiet nights, she drives past the motel on her way home. The neon still flickers, and the car wash still hums across the frozen curb. She thinks about the visitor sticker and the lighthouse logo. She thinks about the wrong name on a band and the right name in a folder miles away. She is not someone who keeps trophies from hard calls. She kept that one photo long enough to send it to the right folder with a receipt. The fact that it stayed during a glitch felt like the kind of accident that refuses to be ignored. It asked for someone to slow down. Her work is not a string of heroic saves. It is a long practice of noticing small, true things before they slip beneath a wave of noise. The photo taught her something she already knew. Details are not decorations, and time is never a blur when someone chooses to write things down. The story ends without fireworks because that is how most true stories end. A hallway returns to normal, and a system gets a little less clumsy. Kira drives home with the window cracked and a song on low volume. She knows nothing can make the loss tidy, but clarity still matters. She unlocks her door, drops her bag, and checks her phone for one last message. The queue is empty, and the app finally reads, "Upload complete." She smiles once without any triumph, then she turns off the light and lets the day settle while the city hums and the clock keeps moving. The stories. This dispatcher flagged a warning nobody else heard. In the summer of 2015, a small county dispatch center in the Midwest logged what should have been another quiet night routine: calls, minor accidents, nothing serious. But at 2:36 a.m., dispatcher Lorna Keats flagged a single line in the call log with a red warning tag. The rest of the shift didn't notice. 12 hours later, a missing person report came in from the same road. Lorna was 52, a mother of 3, and one of the few veteran dispatchers still working nights. She'd spent more than 20 years listening to the county breathe through static. Drunk drivers, runaway teens, distant gunshots that usually turned out to be fireworks. That night, she was scheduled to train a new hire, Evan Rhodes, a quiet 20-something fresh out of community college. He remembered her as calm, methodical someone who double-checked even the quiet calls. The call in question lasted just 19 seconds. It came from an unregistered prepaid cell phone traced to the stretch of County Route 47 between mile markers 19 and 20. The caller didn't say much, just a breathy male voice repeating, "He's still here," before the line cut. Background noise? Steady hum, maybe an engine, maybe wind? Lorna replayed the audio 3 times, then filed it under possible domestic disturbance. but something made her stop the recording and reopen it. According to her later statement, she heard a faint ticking sound under the voice mechanical, uneven. Like a turn signal that never clicked off, she said. At 2:38, she added a note, warning possible vehicle hazard, County 47. No one responded. The patrol car assigned to that region had already been rerouted to a stranded motorist 15 miles away. The shift ended at 6, and by the next day, the flag was buried beneath dozens of other overnight notes. 2 days later, a farmer found a truck half submerged in a drainage ditch along the same stretch of road. Inside was 30-year-old Bradley Norham, a construction worker from a nearby town. Engine still idling, phone missing, seatbelt unlatched. Coroner placed the time of death around 2:40 that same morning, within minutes of Lorna's flagged call. County investigators wrote it up as a single-vehicle accident. They said Bradley likely swerved to avoid a deer, hit the embankment, and drowned before he could escape. Lorna, however, couldn't let it go. She'd handled too many wrecks to ignore the timing. The ticking sound, the phrase, "he's still here," the untraceable number, it didn't add up. A week later, she retrieved the audio from archive storage and took it home on a thumb drive. Her husband found her replaying it that evening, headphones pressed tight, not speaking for almost an hour. She said she thought she heard two different voices, one layered under the main one. A whisper, or maybe a radio echo, she told him. He dismissed it as interference, but Lorna wasn't satisfied. She called the phone company listed in the report, Westridge Cellular, to ask about prepaid tower logs. The representative told her the call had pinged off a repeater near Old Mill Road, 2 miles east of the crash. Problem was, that tower had been offline for maintenance between midnight and 3 a.m. She double-checked through county records. The outage was confirmed. If that was true, the call shouldn't have connected at all. When she brought this to her supervisor, he told her it wasn't her concern. "The system hiccups sometimes," he said. "Let it go." Instead, she filed a quiet memo through the internal server detailing her findings and sent a copy to a friend in the State Highway Patrol. The friend, Officer Miriam Cole, kept the note, but admitted later she didn't think much of it until months afterward. Then, in November of that year, a storm knocked out power across the same district. During the outage, technicians discovered a repeater box still running from an auxiliary generator, a model decommissioned years earlier. Inside it was a burned SIM card fused into the port. Serial number partially visible. It matched the first digits of the untraceable phone from Lorna's warning. This detail never made the official report. A small internal inquiry followed, but concluded there was no functional link between the repeater malfunction and any known incident. By that point, Lorna had already transferred to a day shift. She told coworkers she didn't want to hear the night anymore. Years later, a regional journalist researching abandoned communication systems stumbled on the archived memo. The journalist, Alan Marin, interviewed Lorna at her kitchen table in 2020. By then, she'd retired and moved to a smaller town near the river. In the recording, which he later shared for a local podcast, she said something quietly that caught his attention. "You know what gets me?" he said. "He's still here." Not, "I'm still here." Someone else was supposed to hear it. Alan followed the breadcrumb trail dispatch logs, weather reports, the crash file, and that malfunctioning repeater. He found that the generator inside had been serviced twice after its supposed decommission date, each time by a subcontractor called Northspan Utilities. Northspan had folded in 2013, 2 years before the incident. Whoever maintained that repeater after the shutdown wasn't listed in county records. Allen managed to contact one former Northspan technician, a man named Dennis Harlow. Dennis said that in the early 2000s, some repeaters were used to piggyback maintenance frequencies for nearby rail lines. It was a cheap way to test emergency signals, he said. But it was never supposed to overlap with civilian channels. If it did, you'd get bleed-through, like ghost calls. Ghost calls. That term caught traction online when Allen's podcast aired, though Lorna hated it. She said the word ghost turned it into superstition, not signal bleed, not malfunction. Still, she admitted the possibility haunted her. The crash site, the voice, the timestamp, they lined up too neatly. In 2021, the county repaved Route 47, covering the drainage ditch. The wreckage was long removed, but for maintenance training, new dispatchers were still shown the red flagged log from that night as a case study in procedural diligence. The warning nobody else heard became a quiet legend among the staff, half cautionary tale, half proof of how easily small details slip away. What remained were fragments. The 19-second clip archived under a generic file name, the memo Lorna wrote, the service invoices from Northspan, and the coroner's note listing water in the lungs. Each on its own could mean nothing. Together, they formed a pattern too odd to ignore but too thin to prove. Lorna passed away in 2023. At her retirement gathering the year before, a few old colleagues brought up the story. She just smiled and said, "It was probably static." Then, according to Evan, her trainee from that night, she added quietly, "But static comes from somewhere." At this point, the facts that remained were simple. One call, one warning, one man dead on a dark county road. The system logged everything perfectly except for the truth behind that 19-second window. Whether it was interference, a misrouted test frequency, or something else, no one could ever show exactly who made that call or why it stopped where it did. Still, in the dispatch training manual filed a few years later, there's a footnote beside Lorna's case study. It reads, "Always listen twice before you clear a line." No capital letters, no bold text, just quiet advice embedded between procedural codes. A reminder that sometimes the sound we dismiss as noise might be the only signal that matters. The teacher missing from Cold Springs Elementary. Parents in Placerville still mention a teacher who left her classroom keys on the desk, stepped into the breezeway, and vanished. The building sits north of Main Street, where the oak trees break the summer wind and buses idle near the loop. Afternoon bell lines faded under traffic noise, while a janitor rolled a static-scarred cart toward the multipurpose room. No one noticed anything unusual until the office printer kept spitting forms long after the halls went quiet. Her name in district rosters is Janine Clark, 34, fifth-grade teacher, in town to finish a contracted year. She rented a small studio south of Broadway, reportedly quiet, and kept a habit of walking to work before sunup. Colleagues described careful lesson plans stacked by week and a folded cardigan tucked inside a drawer near the class library. County file from 2009 shows a previous placement in Humboldt County with satisfactory notes and no disciplinary flags. On a warm Thursday in late May of 2019, the office clock read 3:20 when dismissal wrapped. Several students returned for forgotten lunchboxes, one parent asked about reading logs, and buses pulled away. Janine signed the dismissal sheet, placed 2 graded packets in a labeled bin, and told the secretary she would lock up. Dispatch logs later noted a routine call about a stalled sedan on Placerville Drive, unrelated, around the same window. The custodian that week was Arthur Mendez, 57, night shift, on site to prep the gym for a community meeting. He said he saw Janine cross the breezeway with a manila folder under one arm, moving toward the staff room. He remembered a quick wave and a half smile, nothing hurried, and a quiet hallway where the trophy case hummed. His statement says he kept mopping by the south doors until the wax turned even and the clock hit 4. At 4:15, according to archive notes kept by the principal, a substitute teacher named Erin stopped by the copier. She noticed the machine running with no one nearby, pages in neat stacks, and a sticky note asking to refill paper. The sticky note showed Janine's looping script, though investigators never confirmed the note's exact time because the ink bled slightly. Erin said she refilled the tray, gathered the stacks, and left them on the counter under a laminated safety poster. State records show the district uses a keycard system that logs exterior entries, though interior movement remains untracked. The card assigned to Janine recorded entry at 6:51 that morning, and no exit swipe appears that afternoon. Investigators cautioned that propped doors near the breezeway could bypass the system, and some locals claimed staff sometimes did that. Maintenance logs mention hinge repairs on the east exit, possibly encouraging the practice when the wind pressed hard against the frame. A parent volunteer named Samuel Wright, 41, delivery driver, on site to stack donated books, offered a different recollection. He carried 2 boxes toward the library when he heard a short conversation from the staff room that he could not parse. He saw a figure in a blue jacket by the vending machine, not a teacher he recognized, facing the window. He did not see Janine, and he reported the detail only after reading a notice requesting timelines the following Monday. Investigators mapped movements on a campus diagram printed from county archives using colored pins to mark estimated positions and times. The staff room window faces a small garden where students grow tomatoes, and a service gate opens toward the back lot. Security cameras cover the front entrance and the bus loop, leaving the service gate and breezeway without recording. Some locals claimed a camera once watched the breezeway, though budget minutes do not confirm any equipment there during that year. Janine's sedan remained in the parking row closest to the flagpole when deputies arrived around 7 after a delayed call. She kept a reusable water bottle in the cup holder and a spiral notebook on the passenger seat with math notes. The engine was cold and the windows were cracked a finger width, which is common when classrooms run warm in May. A small tote in the back seat contained graded essays bundled with twine and a paper marked for revision. Her phone pinged the tower near Bedford Avenue until 4:27, then showed no further activity that day. A records technician later explained that coverage drops inside certain parts of the building, especially near the inner hall. Investigators never confirmed whether the device powered down or lost battery because the handset was not recovered. The district retains a bring-your-own-device policy, which complicates retrieval of carrier details without a separate order. County file from 2009 includes an older missing person from the same district, though the circumstances differ widely. That case involved a grounds worker who left during a winter storm and returned 2 days later without explanation. Some locals claimed a pattern, but the sheriff publicly said the comparison did not hold and records conflict on timing. The archived notes from that earlier incident emphasize exhausted staffing and slow road clearance rather than campus conditions. A neighbor at Janine's complex told deputies she heard footsteps outside the unit around 5:45 that morning. She described keys clinking and a short cough, which matches a routine Janine mentioned at a staff wellness meeting. The neighbor did not see anyone that afternoon, and she thought Janine would attend a training on the following day. That training appears in district calendars, location marked as the county office, which aligns with emails recovered from the principal's account. A week later, search teams walked the trails behind the school where oak leaves gather in dry gullies. They checked culverts near the water district fence and traced the drainage channel that runs toward the old railroad grade. Cadaver dogs alerted once near a cluster of trash cans, then lost interest, which handlers later described as inconsistent. Investigators never confirmed that alert because wind and heat had shifted and the cans had been emptied earlier that morning. Friends from her previous post in Humboldt County described a cautious person who favored steady routines over last-minute plans. She called her mother on Sundays, kept receipts in envelopes by month, and logged miles for tax records with tidy lines. In Placerville, she reportedly joined a small literacy group that met near Cedar Ravine on alternating Thursdays for practice tutoring. Attendance sheets show 3 meetings in April and early May, and her name appears on each page in neat print. The principal told investigators that budget season pulled staff into long hours and multiple hiring files stacked on her desk. She said she spoke briefly with Janine about a special education referral, and she promised to follow up by email. That email exists in the server archive, timestamped 1:12, with a short reply from Janine at 1:14. The reply references a student name that is redacted in released records, which limits independent confirmation of the context. Several community members recalled seeing a white pickup near the service gate at approximately 4, parked crooked with no emblem. A grounds crew worker said the truck belonged to a vendor who repaired drinking fountains, though the schedule lists no visit. Investigators never confirmed the plate because the gate camera did not exist, and statements vary on the exact bumper stickers. Some locals claimed they saw a ladder in the bed, while others remembered a cooler and a tangle of rope. The custodian Arthur later clarified that he locked the East Hall at 4:30, then walked toward the dumpsters. He said the sky had turned pale with high cirrus and the gym smelled like fresh varnish from the morning coat. He rolled the empty cart past the staff room and noticed a chair pulled out, a half banana, and a humming refrigerator. He did not see the manila folder, and he could not say whether the copier stacks had been moved inside. Family interviews indicate Janine planned a weekend trip to Auburn to see an old roommate who waited at a cafe. The roommate sent a message at 6, then another at 7, and assumed traffic had slowed the drive. When no reply came by 9, she called the district number on the website and reached voicemail. She filed a welfare check request, which appears in dispatch logs at 9:23, triggering the evening response to the campus. A teacher from a neighboring classroom said she found a sticky note under a stapler on the following morning. The note read that a parent conference needed rescheduling after a sibling pickup issue, and the signature looked like Janine's line. Investigators never confirmed whether the note was written that day or earlier in the week, and light smudges complicated analysis. The pen used matched office stock pens that many staff share, which limited any useful tracing of ink purchase records. A local who walks dogs near the fence line reported hearing a short whistle from the garden area around 4:10. He thought it was a child imitating a bird and did not approach the gate, which often sticks near the latch. He later wondered if it signaled someone, though investigators cautioned against building narratives from faint memory. His statement was filed, and the report notes residual mower noise from a neighbor's yard that could mimic a whistle. State records confirm that Janine held a valid credential, and her evaluations listed steady classroom management with consistent routines. Her attendance from January through May showed 2 personal days for dental work and 1 sick day after a winter cold. Payroll noted a pending stipend for after-school tutoring, which had not yet been issued when the year closed. None of those items suggested sudden resignation, and investigators emphasized that employment indicators can mislead when other pressures build quietly. During summer, crews replaced the east exit hinges and repainted the breezeway where varnish had peeled under repeated heat. A maintenance supervisor said the project had been scheduled earlier and supplies were ordered before the school year ended. Some locals claimed the timing erased scuffs that might matter, though county guidelines require routine upkeep before fall. Investigators never confirmed whether any scuff carried evidentiary value, and photos in the file show only generalized wear. In September of that year, hikers reported a neatly folded cardigan near a turnout on Mosquito Road beyond the river. Deputies collected it and noted size and label, which aligned with a brand Janine favored in photos from field trips. The cardigan carried no traceable tag to the store, and rain had passed, which softened any residue on the fabric. The lab report listed indeterminate results, and records conflict on whether the color matched one seen in her classroom drawer. A tip line produced calls about a blue jacket figure seen near the staff room, but descriptions varied by height. One caller remembered a limp, another mentioned a ball cap, and a third thought the zipper shone under fluorescent light. Investigators compared the accounts, and they never confirmed whether those details refer to a single person or several passers-by. The vending machine vendor list showed restock on Tuesday, not Thursday, which complicates assumptions about who lingered in that corner. As the year turned, the district reassigned the classroom and boxed the remaining supplies for storage in a locked cage. A new teacher unpacked the math notebooks after winter break and found a roster with penciled updates beside surnames. The updates matched Janine's handwriting according to a reading specialist who trained with her, though the dateline is blank. The specialist gave a statement that she last saw Janine at lunchtime on Thursday, standing by the copy room doorway. A brief item ran in the local paper referencing a missing teacher, and it led with courteous language about community support. The article cited the sheriff and the principal with spare quotes, and it named the school without giving the address. Comments online drifted toward speculation about roadways and footpaths, which investigators discourage when maps can mislead. That caution appears in archived notes from early briefings, and the phrasing repeats across updates released over the next months. By spring of the next year, the case summary condensed into a timeline that begins with the morning entry swipe. It lists classroom activities through dismissal, notes the copier running, places Arthur in the South Hall, and places Samuel near the library. It marks the unverified Blue Jacket sighting, the unlogged service gate area, and the sedan parked by the flagpole when dusk settled. Then the line ends with the phone ping drop and a blank field where investigators wrote pending until further leads arise. Some locals claimed they saw her hiking on weekends near Cronin Ranch, yet trail cameras never placed her there. Others believed a rideshare picked her up near the loop, but state records show no relevant trips in that time. Theories about staff conflicts appear in informal threads, and investigators never confirmed any disputes that fit the timeline. The available documents lean toward quiet routine turning into absence, and the file holds that shape without stating a cause. The district still keeps her name in older newsletters stored on a public folder that parents browse during enrollment. There are photos of book fairs and science night tables, and in one image, she adjusts a poster while students grin. None of the images show unusual visitors, and timestamps land months before late May, which narrows their significance. The folder remains a reference point for volunteers who remember that spring and for families who ask about the old garden. The classroom has new posters now, and the breezeway smells like wax again when summer arrives and heat rises. Children run toward buses, teachers wave with clipboards, and the office printer chugs through permission slips that stack on the counter. A sign near the garden asks people to keep the gate closed, though the latch still feels loose on windy afternoons. The story remains mostly paper and recollection, anchored by dispatch logs and sober lines that leave the ending open. The woman who disappeared near Carver's Gap. Travelers who stopped at the high pullouts near Carver's Gap reported a woman who waved once, then walked into thin spruce. The trail ran along the bald, where wind hit with steady force from the Tennessee side. Lights stayed flat and cold despite late afternoon, and the ridgeline carried radio traffic from both counties. No one noted a plate because the parking area mixed hikers and locals without clear lines. The first call reached dispatch just before sunset, according to logs released later. Her name in the county file from 2009 matched a teacher who had moved between Carter and Avery over several years. She was 38 and worked part-time as a substitute while picking up seasonal museum hours in Johnson City. Friends said she came for the rhododendron bloom and stayed for the quiet above the state line. She reportedly carried a cheap handheld map and a stainless bottle marked with blue tape. Investigators never confirmed whether she owned a reliable compass, despite several receipts found in storage. The last certain sighting placed her near the wooden post where the Appalachian Trail heads north across the grass. A retired lineman named Carl said she asked about a side path that cut toward Round Bald before the weather turned. He described a calm voice and a careful walker who checked the sky twice and tightened her jacket sleeves. His watch read 4:30 by his account, and his memory stayed fixed on the sound of traffic below. Some locals claimed Carl changed the time later, which state records do not fully address. Dispatch logs mark a second report from a couple who parked beside a dented sedan with faded county stickers. They watched a woman stand near the information board and fold a copy of a trail brochure into a narrow strip. The man recalled her glancing at a silver pickup with an aftermarket light bar, then stepping away without hesitation. The woman recalled a slight limp that appeared only on the downhill portion near the first switchback. Records conflict on whether those statements were taken the same night or days later. Rain moved across Roan High Knob after dark, and patrols split between the paved lot and the forest roads. A ranger from the North Carolina side coordinated with a deputy from the Tennessee side using a shared radio channel. Volunteer searchers gathered near Carver's Gap just after midnight and walked grid lines under steady drizzle and shallow fog. They found boot marks that matched her size near a side trail where moss hid pooled water. Investigators never confirmed those impressions because runoff smeared edges before a cast could cure. Archived notes mention a lightweight day pack found under low branches around a quarter-mile from the main path. Inside were snack wrappers and a folded paper with a grocery list and a museum shift date. A phone sat in the outer pocket with a drained battery and a hair elastic wrapped twice around it. The screen held shallow scratches but no cracks, and the case showed a faded tourist sticker. Technicians pulled the card and recovered brief texts that ended earlier than the last reported sighting. Avery County reports list two unconfirmed leads involving a silver pickup seen idling near the pullout before rain. One hiker said the truck crept past the lot twice, which he found strange given poor visibility and slick pavement. Another hiker said the driver leaned forward and checked the mirror often while the engine surged at irregular intervals. Investigators never confirmed whether the pickup belonged to a local contractor who worked on fences near the highway. Records conflict on the license digits and the description of a sticker behind the rear glass. State records show a previous call involving the same teacher on Roan Mountain during early spring of 2019. She reportedly got turned around in sudden fog near Grassy Ridge and waited beside a cairn until voices approached. The party who found her said she stayed calm and kept talking about frost hollows and bird calls to stay oriented. An incident note described firm boots and a careful pace with brakes at regular intervals despite dropping temperature. Investigators never confirmed whether that episode affected her later planning or gear choices before June. In the week after the disappearance, family and colleagues organized small teams and checked shelters to the north. A museum co-worker carried printouts and asked pieced questions at hostels and gas stations between Elizabethton and Banner Elk. Several people remembered her spending coins on coffee and a pastry at a market near Roan Mountain State Park. Others insisted they saw someone else with similar hair and a similar jacket, which complicated the running timeline. The county file from 2009 contains those notes without a firm ruling on identity. A storm knocked power lines across the ridge and slowed organized searching while crews worked along the highway shoulders. Helicopter support reportedly stood by until wind readings dropped into a safer band above the open balds. Heat signatures came and went as fog shifted across gullies and pooled in low draws between thick spruce. Teams marked possible tracks that crossed and recrossed animal prints near a wet seep where runoff gathered. Investigators never confirmed a single continuous line that matched her boots from the parking area. Weeks later, a trail runner found a stainless bottle wedged under a root beside a shallow step. Blue tape clung to the metal, and a fingerprint technician lifted partials that matched previous samples from her apartment. The cap showed light grit and a torn gasket, which might explain a sweet smell noted by two searchers. Some locals claim the bottle had not been there during early sweeps, which raised questions about movement after rain. Records conflict on when the site was first photographed and tagged for follow-up. The apartment in Johnson City held careful stacks of notebooks and a shoebox filled with admission stickers. One notebook mentioned a plan to walk the balds alone to map views for a lesson about settlement routes. Another page listed bus times and an alternate ride from a coworker whose statement later changed on 2 points. The coworker first said she offered a ride to the Gap, then said she offered a pickup from the Gap. Investigators never confirmed either offer, which left timing gaps across the late afternoon window. Bank records show a small withdrawal that morning and no further activity after the day of the hike. A library card saw used 2 days earlier for field guides that matched the notes found near the day pack. A phone account tied to a prepaid plan rolled over minutes on schedule without manual action from family. Technicians found no logins after the last tower handshake near the state line on the ridge. Dispatch logs carry that timestamp and mark it as the final verified ping. A rumor formed around an old farm road that drops toward a creek where anglers leave crushed cans. A property owner told deputies about a woman who waved once near a locked gate before stepping into Laurel. He could not fix the date and changed the season at least twice during follow-up interviews. His dog growled at the brush that evening, and he found cords of stacked wood disturbed along the fence. Investigators never confirmed the account, and state records caution that memory shifted after news coverage. Later that summer, a faded sedan matching the parking lot vehicle was towed from a private lot near Elk Park. A shop owner said the driver left it overnight and never returned to settle a quoted repair. The owner thought the driver was male based on height and a cap pulled low across the brow. The tag returned to a different county, and paperwork took time because of mismatched mailing records. Archive notes say the lead produced no direct link to the missing teacher despite initial excitement. By fall, snow brushed the high grass, and searchers changed tactics to check drainages for winter evidence. Teams followed game trails where leaves bridged small streams and gusts erased prints within minutes. A jacket scrap turned up near a low snag, but color comparisons did not match clothing in photographs. A volunteer insisted the fabric felt similar to a liner she wore during spring trips on the same ridge. Investigators never confirmed the match, and records conflict on whether the sample was cataloged correctly. The museum held a small gathering where colleagues read notes about her lectures on birds and trade routes across the mountains. A student recalled her steady pace during a field trip and a habit of counting steps between viewpoints. Another student remembered a hesitant smile that appeared when someone mentioned weather reports and trail etiquette near fragile plants. Some locals claimed she had hinted at moving away, which her sister denied in interviews with a regional reporter. The county file from 2009 keeps both statements without comment on reliability. Winter closed the high road at intervals and ice grew along shaded cuts where plows could not hold traction. Crews marked fallen limbs and flagged slick corners while visitors stayed lower in the valley towns. The case slipped from headlines but stayed in quarterly summaries prepared for both county commissions. Detectives traded notes about similar disappearances along the border where ridges tangle and lines divide jurisdiction. Investigators never confirmed meaningful overlap beyond weather patterns and occasional vehicle descriptions. In spring, a new ranger reviewed the folder and walked the first 3 miles north at dawn. He carried the printed dispatch logs and paused where the bale wire fence dips near a wet meadow. He noted how sound traveled along the bald and how voices blended with trucks grinding up the grade. A sudden shift in cloud shadow hid the post where the trail turns and the path narrowed near wind-stunted trees. His memo suggested a simple misturn compounded by weather and fatigue without clear evidence of intent. Years have not settled the case, and no court file closes the matter with certainty. Reportedly, a hiker sometimes meets a man who still repeats the time and the steps and the exact wind. He stands by the wooden post and points where the grass folds over and the path looks wider than it is. Some locals claim she walked out on a different day and left by a service road near the towers. Investigators never confirmed that ending, and records conflict enough to keep the question alive near Carver's Gap. The stories. This highway turnout kept a secret roadside ledger. The turnout sat 3 miles past the hill crest, where the shoulder widened and an old guardrail curled around scrub pines. It looked like any layover patch on a western freight route, wind-scoured and sun-bleached, the kind of place drivers used when the low gear cooked too hot. Ivo Calderon was 34 and worked highway maintenance out of a county yard near a small valley town. He had the steady patience of someone who counted reflectors at dawn, and he kept a pocket notebook for bolts that liked to work loose. He planned a simple loop that Tuesday: swap a cracked mile marker, replace a dented sign, check the culvert at the turnout. He pulled the county pickup beside the rail and killed the engine, and the quiet after the fan belt felt too clean. He had heard drivers call the turnout a good place to let brakes breathe, and earlier dispatch chatter mentioned a stalled sedan reported before sunrise. The sedan was gone now, but a dark rectangle pressed into gravel showed where tires had slept. He walked the rail, tapped bolts with a wrench, and found a new scar where the metal had curled inward like a knuckle. He crouched to look for glass or plastic, and his fingers met tin. The box felt cold despite the heat, wedged under the rail post with 2 flat rocks bracing it tight. He checked for snakes first, then slid it out with a sand scuff. Inside was a ledger wrapped in a cut trash bag, bound with string, edges rubbed thin as old denim. On the first page, someone had printed "Mile 37 turnout, keep it dry, return it where you found it." The handwriting was neat, each line pressed with a heavy hand that understood trucks and weather. The early entries read like a log of small trades, which made sense in that place and on that road. Diesel siphoned and replaced with cash, jump starts marked with initials, spare brake light bulbs counted like borrowed pencils. The dates were written carefully as words, like 2019 and 2020, and then the numbers stopped for a while when the world went strange. He flipped to a recent page and noticed a different style, lighter ink and quicker strokes that curled on the downstroke. It said, "Skimmer crew parked by mile 32 according to a driver. Call the county before you accept a tow." Another said, "Gray sedan with a trailer ball gave bottles and left at dawn. Check camera near the crest for plate." He looked at the tin again and found a folded slip beneath the ledger that smelled like lemon cleaner. Someone had written, "If you find this and you work the road, please look at dispatch logs from last winter." He recognized the phrasing and the gentle push, not a demand, more like a tired neighbor asking you to look through a fence. He set the ledger back in the tin, snapped a quick photo for memory, and secured the box the way he had found it. The air felt still, and a low thunder came from the downshift of a distant semi that needed the long lane more than talk. He got in the truck, scratched a date in his pocket notebook, and drove back toward the yard with the uneasy feeling of stepping on a path with fresh footprints. In the office after lunch, he pulled archived calls on the shared computer, which the crew used for storm maps and shift swap. The log from late winter listed a cluster of calls around mile 30, with drivers reporting a two-truck team that arrived fast and unasked. One entry used the word predatory, which was rare in casual notes, and another mentioned cash prices on a scrap of paper. He kept reading and saw a note from a county deputy about skimmers on card readers at a nearby fuel plaza. That plaza sat between the crest and the river bridge, where drivers like to grab coffee and plug in sleepers to keep a steady chill. He printed the page, then printed the call clusters, and wrote the turnout mile in the margins because he trusted his own ink. The next morning, he returned to the route early, with a thermos and a camera that clipped to the dash like a square eye. He planned to change a reflector near the crest and let the camera watch the turnout. Nothing secret, just habit dressed as curiosity. The road held a thin fog that looked like breath on glass, and the pines below the rail felt damp enough to keep a secret. He parked, waited a few minutes, and watched a box truck pull in slow with brakes sighing like someone settling into a couch. A woman climbed out, mid-40s, hair tied back, shoulders set like someone who carried more than straps and ratchets. She checked her wheels, knocked her lugs with a bar, then walked to the guardrail with a mason jar wrapped in a towel. She crouched where the tin lived, did not look around, and worked like a person who practiced in silence and noticed the small things. She took the ledger out, slid in the folded towel, wrote 3 lines, then added a smaller page clipped by a binder clip that made a sharp click. He felt guilty watching and looked down to pretend his coffee needed attention, which it did not, but pretend worked anyway. He waited until she left, then pretended to check the culvert again, this time with a small shovel that made the roll feel official. He eased the tin out, opened the ledger to the fresh page, and read a tidy note that felt like a breadcrumb. It said, "Tow crew again, near mile 32 last night. Reportedly told a young driver they worked with the county." Another line said, "I am leaving 4 bottles of coolant and a bag of rags for anyone stuck with a pinhole." He wrote a line himself, kept to the ledger tone, and made sure the ink did not bleed through on the thin paper. He wrote, "County maintenance checked the turnout, no affiliation with tow crews, call dispatch if pressured." He tucked his page under the binder clip and slid everything back, angling the rocks to wedge firm because small rituals matter when the wind gets ideas. He drove to the fuel plaza later that morning, the one near the bridge where the skimmers had allegedly lived, and asked around. The cashier, a young guy with a careful haircut, said a retired radio operator sometimes handed out paper maps to drivers who looked lost. Reportedly, he kept notes on who needed help and who pushed scams, and he liked the old ways more than the new screens. The cashier said, "You want Arlene, not me," and pointed at the small sandwich counter where a woman was sorting bread with clean hands. Arlene had the posture of someone who had stood for decades without complaint, and her eyes moved fast like she listened with more than ears. She listened to Evo explain his job and his curiosity, then nodded once like a shop teacher hearing a decent plan. She said, "There is a book, but we do not write full names because we do not want fights here." She said, "Some truckers leave notes about who helped, and sometimes they warn about boys who show up too fast with chains." She added, "A retired dispatcher named Theo started it after 2014 when the corner got tricky, and people forgot how to flag without yelling. Ivo asked if anyone had brought up mile 32 in the last month, and she looked past him like she was reading a chalkboard on a far wall. She said, "A kid in a small coupe said 2 trucks boxed him at night and tried to sell a winch like a miracle." She said the kid left when another driver pulled behind him with hazards blinking, which often makes a different kind of math happen. He thanked her and bought a sandwich he had not planned to buy, then sat in his truck and wrote lines in his pocket notebook. He marked the phrases retired dispatcher, ledger, tow scam, and noted that older hands tend to leave cleaner trails than noisy crews. He waited for his coffee to cool, then called the deputy listed on the winter logs and left a message saying he was checking a few things near the crest. The deputy called back that afternoon, voice calm, words clipped like someone who learned to talk over traffic noise. The deputy said there had been several reports of quick tow teams and a few complaints about skimmers, but nothing firm enough for a charge. He added that a neighbor near the climb heard engines idling around midnight often, and his dog growled the way dogs do when a rhythm is wrong. Ivo returned to the turnout at dusk with a reflective vest and a flashlight because nothing good happens when you pretend the dark is friendly. He checked the tin and found another page, this one printed with careful block letters like a patient teacher. It said, "If you need to know, check the gate camera on the service road above the crest and ask for last January." He knew the service road, a narrow cut that served a radio tower, and a wind monitor the county refused to replace. The gate had an old camera that fed a shared system, which logged plates and headlights more than faces and worked better than anyone expected. He sent a request through the county portal and asked for January footage from late night hours, and the reply came with a link and a warning about file size. He watched the clips after dinner on the break room monitor because the screen at home had a cracked corner he never fixed. In one clip, the turnout sat dark and empty until a pair of flatbeds eased in like wolves that knew the fence lines. Minutes later, a small hatchback rolled to a stop, hazard lights pulsing a tired heartbeat, and the flatbeds moved as if pulled by the same string. He watched the first driver step out and talk with quick hands, then watched the second driver circle the hatchback like it had a scent. A third vehicle pulled in and stopped behind the hatchback, a high sleeper with long antenna wires and an American flag sticker on the lower door. The hatchback backed away slow, then faster, and left the turnout with the sleeper following, which made the flatbeds idle in place. Next, he watched late January. And this clip hurt because the rain made everything shine like a wet stage where actors forgot their lines. A refrigerated trailer pulled in with smoke from one wheel, a soft gray that looked almost polite until it thickened at the edges. Within minutes, 2 figures worked the hub, one with a small extinguisher, one holding a flashlight, steady and calm, even as the smoke turned rude. The next page of the ledger joined the footage in his mind and made something click that felt like a seatbelt slipping into place. The page listed a night where a driver named Ash met a retired radio man who carried a milk crate of fuses and flagged traffic by feel. It said Ash made it to the next exit and left a case of water behind the rail as thanks, and the radio man refused cash with a stubborn grin. He started to suspect the ledger was not only a list of favors or warnings, but a quiet schedule for kindness that traveled under the grid. The binder clips held more than paper, they held little runs of trust, and a handful of people had decided the turnout would be a tiny town square. He still had to connect the tow crews to something more firm, or at least line up a clean path between names and nights. He reviewed the January footage again, then compared timestamps against dispatch logs, and found a gap where a call had been recorded but then labeled incomplete. The call preview mentioned a shaky voice saying 2 trucks had blocked a lane near mile 32, and another voice saying help was already on the way. The logs showed no county units listed, and the note ended with line dropped, likely lost signal. He printed the clip stills and wrote notes by hand, careful to keep letters large and unhurried because speed ruined more ink than rain. He visited the plaza again and asked Arlene if she knew a retired radio man named Theo, which made her mouth twitch like a bad joke arrived late. She said Theo still came in on Thursdays to trade old surplus radios for stories he liked better than the radios themselves. On Thursday, she waved Ivo to a small table near the window where a thin man sat with a canvas cap and a careful breath. Theo looked at the stills without touching them and asked easy questions about wind direction and how long the trucks had stayed put. He read the ledger note photocopy and raised one eyebrow at the refund line where someone had scratched out an unkind word. Theo said, "That book started when we lost a pullout after a washout in 2014 and needed somewhere to map goodwill." He said, "We kept names light on purpose. No addresses, no hero stories, just notes that kept people honest enough to look in the mirror." He added, "I have reported the cruise twice with plates, but the plates led to a rental maze that likes to erase footprints." Ivo asked if Theo would mind adding a line that county maintenance knew the ledger existed, and Theo nodded once like a metronome. He wrote in a tight script, "County eyes know this book and prefer its honesty, no affiliation with any tow company." He slid the pen back with 2 fingers, then told a quick story about a snow chain locker that used to freeze shut and how a hammer can respect stubborn metal without breaking it. The next week, Ivo placed a small metal cabinet behind the rail, painted brown like the dirt, no markings, no lock, just a storm latch. Inside, he put rags, coolant, a cheap inflator, and a folded card that said, "Call dispatch and wait if anyone pressures you about towing." The ledger went into the cabinet with its tin, and a note asked writers to close the latch because the wind enjoyed rude jokes. Word spread in the slow way good habits move when they do not ask for attention or applause. Drivers left cleaner notes with times and directions that avoided names, and one traveler wrote a careful line about a black dog that lay near the rail at night to watch tires pass like planets. A deputy added, quietly and without badge number, that a new camera watched the mile 32 shoulder from an angle the crews did not expect. In early summer, a box truck driver named Kelda wrote about a man who flagged her down and pointed to a soft tire, then asked for cash. She wrote, "I offered water and a phone call, and he left without names," and a second car watched from the shadow near the sign. 2 days later, someone wrote, "Gray sedan again, park lights off, backed away when 2 vehicles pulled in together. Report filed at the substation." The plaza cashier taped a simple note near the register that said, "Tow authorization is free by county phone. Ask before you pay anyone." The retired radio man drew a small map to the turnout for a college kid hauling a couch and told him to rest his brakes in the shade because patience kept families alive. The kid returned a week later and left a bag of chips and a soft drink in the cabinet with a note that said, "Thanks for the air." Ivo felt the road change by inches, the way a river shifts after a downed tree moves just enough to stop a hidden whirl. He still checked bolts and reflectors, he still swept glass after fender kisses, he still logged storms the way farmers count clouds. He also read the ledger when the latch stuck, and he understood that small tools, shared quietly, can be stronger than loud plants. In late summer, a line appeared in a new hand, careful and slow, as if the writer wanted the words to stand up straight. It said, "2 trucks tried a price on a young couple in a silver van near mile 32 last night. Another driver blocked and called." It ended, deputies arrived, reportedly took reports, crews left before plates could be confirmed, camera angle improved view. Ivo printed that line for the deputy and handed over the catalyst chain he had assembled, which was not a case file, just a path. The deputy said thanks without a smile, and later called to say a larger investigation had opened that spanned beyond their stretch of quiet hills. He did not ask for the ledger, and he did not tell Ivo to stop watching. He only asked that the book stay clean of full names to protect decent people. The turnout kept breathing in its slow way, heat riding off gravel in visible waves that made everything wobble and dreamlike. The ledger pages grew soft at the corners, and someone glued reinforced strips to the spine with care that matched the first handwriting. Now and then, a new driver wrote a sentence that sounded grateful for a simple jug of water left by a stranger with a pencil. A local professor left a note about starting a small roadside history project and asked if anyone minded a photocopy at the library. Theo wrote yes, but keep the copy without names, use dates written as words, and call it the Mile 37 book. The library later displayed a scan that showed a landscape of small trades and warnings, nothing dramatic, just a community stitched by traffic and time. Ivo stopped keeping his own separate notes once the system felt stable enough to grow without him tugging at every thread. He still checked the cabinet latch, still wiped dust off the tin, still tightened bolts with gloves that smelled like oil. And Sunday, he understood the ledger worked because it was specific but humble, and because no one wanted ownership beyond a steady line and clear daylight. When the wind came down from the ridge and the pines whispered like a big crowd that agreed on the same joke, the turnout looked ordinary. It still hid a storage of rags and coolant. It still held a book with entries written in hands that learned patience from asphalt. It still sat 3 miles past the crest, where trucks let their brakes breathe, and people learned to slow down enough to see one another. He remembered the first time he had levered the tin from the dust, felt the weight of words that did not need a speech. He thought about the winter calls, the quick hands at the hub, the quiet driver who blocked a box and made the math different. He thought about how a secret can be a responsibility more than a thrill, and how some secrets work best when shared carefully and left mostly unremarked. Arlene kept handing out maps and sandwiches, the cashier kept teasing drivers about their sweet tooth, and Theo kept trading radios for stories he liked better. The deputy kept watching Mile 32 from an angle that made crews uncomfortable, and the plaza lights kept throwing a honey glow across damp pavement after late rain. The road kept moving people who carried every kind of trouble and hope inside their glove boxes and on their dashboards. The ledger held a few blank pages that looked like future mornings and late nights, and the latch kept closing with a soft click. Travelers kept adding lines that sounded like a handshake, and the turnout kept holding small proof that strangers can decide to be neighbors. The book did not stop every scheme, but it hurt the margins enough that different plans made more sense than the old fast money ones. Ivo still checked the culvert after storms, still measured sediment against last season, still logged a snake sighting when a thicket rattled like loose change. He knew the ledger would change hands again eventually, not because he wanted it, but because the road decides and the people follow. He trained a new hire to watch for bolts that work loose and told him that some fixes start with a pencil and a jar. If anyone asked why the turnout mattered, he would point to the cabinet and the scrub pines and the clean lines of the rail. He would say that a book of simple favors became a ledger of safety, and that safety looked ordinary until you added up the lines. He would not mention names, and he would not tell a single hero story, because none of it needed that kind of shine. The highway kept its stubborn rhythm, and the ledger kept its quiet balance, and both felt honest in a way that made sense. The secret was not really a secret anymore, not to the people who needed it and respected what it asked. It asked for neat lines, shared tools, clear times, and the courage to arrive with hazards on and no need for applause.